Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. For joining this is obviously a super stressful and super interesting time in the economy around the world. The novel COVID-19 is spreading, and humans are suffering. That is what we should all be focused on. But today we are not doctors, we are economists, and the COVID-19 is most definitely spreading economic suffering worldwide. I'm an economist with a special interest in asset pricing, especially internationally. So watching the pandemic unfold has given me a chance to consider my work in a new context. Let me share with you the wisdom of scholars in economics and finance, combined with other useful data on what this means as governments think about restarting their economy at the same time as investors are debating on how to better cope with such a pandemic crisis. The way I think about it first flashes think about two curves from the study by University of Berkeley. One was a curve about the pandemic with infection or mortality from a healthcare perspective. Public health policy aims to flatten the curve by imposing social distancing measures and promoting health practice to reduce the transmission rate. The flattening of this curve would spread the pandemic over time, enable more people to receive much more proper health treatment, with the consequence in lowering the fatality rate. That is the blue curve in this figure. So let's assume that we have managed to be on the flattened blue infection curve. Then what are the macroeconomic implications? Economists will argue that, at least in the short run, flattening the infection curve will no doubt steepen the macroeconomic recession curve. We recognize that problems in both infection and recession are externalities, actions that are individually perfectly sensible but collectively harmful. The fact is that the economy also faces a flatten the curve problem. With proper economic support, the impact of the downturn could be represented by the red curve in this figure. Output lost dramatically, amplified by the economic decisions of millions of economic agents who are trying to protect themselves by cutting spending, shelving investment, cutting down credit, and generally hunkering down capital. Ironically, the economy have a negative externalities by isolating. In the same figure, the blue shaded area represents the economic downturn. If we could prevent any additional economic infections, limit the economic damage to the loss of output during this pandemic crisis. So the next logical question here is how economic policy can act decisively to prevent these economic infections. Of course, we have seen a variety of governmental policies have been implemented around the world. Here is the graph created by the Yale Program on Financial Stability. Specifically, central banks, including the Fed, have provided emergency liquidity to the finance sector, which is the light blue brought in the figure at the top, as well as the macroprudential policy shown in the blue bar in the middle. Fiscal stabilization, corresponding to the yellow bar, you can think about this as some decline in government fiscal revenue and the increase in transfer also help lessen the blow of economic downturns. The list of countries including the US with the highest number of policy and interventions. South Korea ranks the second, and Brazil, interestingly, right, ranks as the third by the study. It is important to keep in mind what economic policy can and cannot do. We cannot expect to completely eliminate a recession altogether. The objective here is just to manage and shut period is shorten the period of recessions and reduce the magnitude of the downturn. The recessions will be there. It will be massive, but hopefully short-lived and not overwhelming around the world. Taking all this policy into considerations, the IMF projected in the latest World Economic Outlook report the global economy to contract sharply by 3% in 2020, much worse than during the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis. More specifically, the growth in the advanced group is projected at negative 6.1% in 2020. Most economies in the group are forecast to contrast this year, including the US with negative 5.9%, Japan with the negative 5.2%, the United Kingdom with the negative 6.5%, as well as Germany, France, and Italy. Among the emerging markets and developing economies, all countries face a health crisis, severe demand shock, dramatic tightening in global financial conditions, and a plunge in commodity prices. All will have a severe impact on economic activities. Overall, the group of emerging markets is projected to contrast by 1% in 2020. Excluding China, the growth rate will be much worse, go down to negative 2.2%. But the hope is in front of us. 2021 may bring us some good news. Global GDP growth is expected to rebound to 5.8%, reflecting the normalization of economic activity from very low levels. The advanced economy group is forecast to grow 4.5%, while growth for the emerging markets is forecast at 6.6%. It's interesting to know that either from the 2020 growth rate or from the 2021 rebound, the emerging markets seems to be the hope for the world in terms of bringing in positive GDP growth around the world. However, it's really important to keep in mind, as with the size of the downturn, there is much more uncertainties in emerging markets around the strength of this recovery. Some aspects might underpin this rebound. Among them, here what I would like to point out in particular. I'm just going to borrow shamelessly from a sequence of empirical research in international finance on the partial segmentation format of the international markets, on how the private sector, foreign capital will move around between the advanced economies and developing economies. And now, I'm going to throw another graph to you. This is from the McKinsey Global Institute of what I would call overall the financial globalizations of the economy. And this in terms of flow. Oftentimes we catch the measure of the pace of globalizations through the actual size of the cross-border flow as a fraction of GDP. And these are trillions of dollars, showing there is almost halving post-global financial crisis in the size of cross-border capital flow from wherever to wherever, okay? And you can see a drop about 20% of GDP in 2007 to about 6% of GDP in 2017. And it is continuing today. But remember, I just give you a tip here in the previous slide on the comparison between developed markets versus emerging markets. So now look at this picture. This is from IFF, which stands for the Institute of International Finance. It's a great institute. You can find a lot of data there. And in this figure, lots of color there, but what it's showing you is that flows, and these are FDI portfolio flows, M&As from wherever but targeting emerging markets. You can see financial globalization have led a dramatic increase in global capital flow to emerging markets before the global financial crisis, particularly from the early 2000s. However, there has been periods of magnified pace of deglobalizations we seen in previous pictures continuing in emerging markets post global financial crisis and in 2013 during the temper tangent, which we will talk more later after two slides. Yes, this is interesting in deconstructing these flows post-financial crisis. Maybe Latin America took a little bit of backseat. Asia and China continued to pace, and even Central Middle East Africa, as well as Central Europe, continued during this group period. And you can see the actual form of this on the right-hand side. But the message here is that emerging markets continue to pace post-global financial crisis, and the receding of cross-border capital flow, mainly on FDI, portfolio debt, portfolio equities, this really active investment. Alright, the key message here is that emerging markets have become more segmented from the world or more sensitive to the shocks to financial globalizations. Are you still with me? Great. Now let's zoom in this really interesting emerging market portfolios in a monthly frequency. We can clearly see the dramatic down drop in the most recent month. In particular, the last month, we see almost $1 billion of the ingress out of the emerging markets from all around the world. So you sit there and pause and think and say, well, have I seen something like this before? And the answer is, of course we have. Now I'm showing you is the picture from 2013, where we've seen this cascading across markets in the developing economies. This is the picture that are being by the Bank for International Settlement Quarterly Review, puts out a report one that summarizes on the single month alone, $35 billion money were vamping out of the emerging markets in one single month. You may wonder, what had happened there? Is it systematic? Let's take a step back. Please look at these pictures that I borrowed from the study from Dr. Andrew Crowley from Cornell University. So the top line here is the Morgan Stanley Capital International World Index. We can say it's capital weighted, value weighted of stocks from all around the world, including emerging markets. And you can exactly work toward the developed markets, like the US, representing 30 to 35% of the index. You can see during the course of 2013, they are rocketing and rolling up. Down here, there's a specialized index called MSCI Emerging Market Index. You see this go to a very different direction during 2013. This one cumulatively lost about 7 to 8%, while the top line has gained almost over 20%. Now, what I'm going to do is to lower the microscope here. I don't know whether you will notice. Look at the bottom line. There's a special time where there's interesting here, and I'm not going to focus on right there. And this is May and June period. This really where was clear separations that the two markets there. And what I have done here is to break up the emerging markets into 5 country-specific index. They are really interesting. Brazil, India, China, Russia, and South Africa. You can see, okay, is there any kind of commonality in this May and June period? somewhere around the third week of the May, which is the starting point that all cascading downward altogether through June. Is it a consequence? We might want to think about this time period. What do you think? What happened in May and June in 2013? Such this large spike, massive raising of the exit, and obviously coincidence with this large market decline and currencies depreciations. I should mention that as well. Anybody know this gentleman? Who is this? It's Dr. Bernanke, former chair of the Fed Reserve Board here in the US, just walked down the road here to Washington. He was also the chair of the Federal Open Market Committee, basically determining about the interest rate. And my question for you here is what has been happening in the years leading up to June in this 2013? Think about it. After the global financial crisis for past 16 years, we have interest rate at zero, as we already hit the bottom, and we cannot just be lower practically, right? And what we have been doing is to try very hard to boost the US economy, something called quantitative easing. You heard about it, right? Really similar to what the Fed has been done in this month. And what happened on, this another very unusual, historical, unusual in normal behavior, more aggressive than the last sequence. It has a zero interest rate. And on top of that, aggressively buying bonds, even on high yield bonds, to keep interest rate low for the rest of the actions rate. So on one of the key press of the conference, Mr. Bernanke used magically word called normalize. Mean that, okay, after 6 years during the post-global financial crisis, we going to start to lift our foot off the gas, maybe just a little bit. After 6 years post the global financial crisis, because the economy just started doing good. The data started looking positive. Development in the labor market, and they are just starting to adding more jobs, normalize monetary policy, right? But, ladies and gentlemen, that word spooked the market. A word like normalize spooked the market. They call this easing back of the bonds buying program, the tapering of quantitative easing in the aftermath of the announcement. The taper will begin the tantrum from all over the world start to coming in. This is a China Daily, a nice cartoon. This is saying the G20 meeting. That is happening in September. And you can see this kind of cheeky cartoon. All these politicians lining up. That is Uncle Sam. They are supposed to play a really beautiful, amazing piano in Bensoul here. And Sambo here. And he doesn't have the right instrument, am I right? He's playing some other really different instrument. This is referred to taper tantrum. And this gentleman, he say, hey guys, do you realize what you are doing? I know you are focusing on your own goals, your own objective. Make sure you are dealing with your own economy and try to help recovery. But don't you under the illusion that you are not having some spillover impact on the rest of the world? So some of the tangent, this gentleman here, anybody recognize them? This is the governor of the Central Bank of Brazil at the very left end. And the gentleman in the middle, Raghuram, he's the governor for India, sitting governor of Reserve Bank in India. And he said it's a much stronger toe here. And on the right hand side, as the representative from China. And now it turns out some of these countries in the aftermath during the taper tensions were affecting differently than the others. Here again come from the same study by Dr. Andrew Crowley. Relatively speaking, Argentina and China suffers the most in the outflows of the foreign debt and equity. So this is Korea on the bottom right. That looks alike neither. Mexico inflows, right? Interestingly, you see really interesting different things here. Well, all the books talking about the growth potential, all the upside opportunities, but the downside, however, it is the fundamental risk that keep people away. This is the real stories. In cracking the emerging market enigma, international expert Dr. Andrew Crowley developed a multinational assessment framework in which to evaluate the opportunities and, more importantly, the risk of investing in emerging markets, as shown in the figure for the BRIC countries again, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. It provides a 6 dimensions, 6 indicators, from the political instability, operationalized inefficiency, to market capacity, to limits to the legal protections, and to foreign accessibility restrictions. Basically, the book harvests the wisdom of academic research and synthesized to single index with PC principal component analysis in the previous slide, as well as the pentagon diagram in the much details for each of those countries. As you may see, the range of the axis is reset from the origin figure to accommodate a greater range of score, but it preserved to be the same across the 4 countries to facilitate comparison. These figures can be useful for us, for investors, to make economic analysis and make sensible decisions when analyze the impact of these shocks on each of those emerging markets, which I believe is the biggest pain in response to this pandemic crisis, previous global financial crisis, and now the COVID-19, even to the post-COVID-19 normalization period. We could stop here, and I would stop here, except for the fact that there's really interesting things to keep us think hard. What we have seen, ladies and gentlemen, is the unprecedented unraveling of portfolio positions in emerging markets in the last 2 months, which we have seen before, but putting in a disaggregate format and primarily in equities, which in the blue rather than in blue in the left-hand side figure. And just put a framing on this. The right-hand side showing you just exactly the massive falling of the COVID-19 cliff. Capital stocks relative to previous related events which are already in the history. So many research papers focus on, for example, the global financial crisis, the taper tangent 2013, when the Fed was normalized the capital flow. Takeaway here for the talk today is that the recovery of the emerging markets is indeed expected to take a much longer and much more uncertain way. Okay, thank you for letting me talk about the work from the domain of economic and finance, older work and newer work through the COVID-19 lens. Do let me know any question you might have. Feel free to contact me. We would love to chat more. Thank you.